Continuing with the theme that we are debating or studying or analyzing, the institution that did not consolidate it. Today it corresponds to address a second aspect of this topic and to deepen a little bit in the structure itself. It is fundamental because it will allow us to have a broad and a very clear vision in these moments and times of confusion. One of the fundamental pillars of the Messianic teaching of the Messiah Jesus, or the teaching of Jesus the Messiah, of which much did not survive by the way, even though it is written, even though it is found in the Holy Scriptures, but did not survive in the religious world because of a series of circumstances and events that we consider that in a determined moment we will be obliged to treat and study. The Church of God has considered that it is fundamental to share this series of teachings with all those that are interested in knowing the truth. And that is why the Church, with great efforts, has decided to have this radio programming and has made available to all those that have interest, curiosity, or desire to learn more in its webpage, an email that we have always been announcing, so that those that want to write us can do it. In our webpage you will find some sites of interest, some studies. You can ask for them by email. Also the radio address and some Facebook addresses. That is why in the development of the study we will be giving these addresses so that the persons that are interested can give themselves a moment, an opportunity to check these places, these websites. Returning to the principal theme, today it corresponds to make an approach a little bit more surgical, more concrete, more crumble, more inquirer regarding this issue of the institution that did not consolidated. That is why that seeing in perspective how the events develop and their consequences, in the same way we need to observe in a delicate and accurately and surgically form the events that mark that the institution or institutions did not consolidate it, because this allows us in a special and difficult to understand way and with more clarity the factors that influence what in nowadays we know as the supplanted and paganized faith by antagonistic groups known in the underworld of the iniquity as the Paulines or Paulists and the Pedrists or the Pedrons, who gave form to a series of pagan institutions, which in time they legalized and turned them religious and acceptable to all those that were becoming devotees of them. In other words, we cannot understand our current times if we do not start from the beginning, from the birth of things, to understand them. And this is fundamental because when we do not know where we are and we do not understand where we are heading to, we found ourselves plainly and simply lost. And this is because this topic of the institution that did not consolidate it is a very well complicated topic, quite scandalous. Hardly someone wants to treat, search, investigate, and inquire in it. And that occurs because of powerful interests that move behind this, which we consider to be an industry of the spectacle and of the entertainment. In this regard of the sacrifice of the Messiah Jesus, and in this regard also of the different efforts of God to lead humanity to the true knowledge. We must remember that nowadays there exists a dispute, a struggle, and that struggle, that dispute, that fight, that battle cannot be unknown to anyone. And that struggle is given between those who are carriers of the science of good and evil and those who fight to know the truth. Because those that have bent to the science of good and evil have their own characteristics and live their lives according to those principles, protocols, procedures, dogmas, and doctrines. And those that the truth calls make extraordinary efforts to abandon what once was their science. So we cannot abstract ourselves of this conflict that still continues occurring until today. And it's important that we understand that the faith once entered in a crisis, and that crisis produced a great division, the famous division between East and West, what in history is known as the division of the Church between the Roman Apostolic and the one of the believers of Constantinople. But we are not going to dwell deeply in that issue, because the study is not about history, but it picks up history to give the adequate brush strokes to the painting that we pretend to finish, so that it can be admired. That was how it began and was initiated the greatest deceit in current history, with dire and perverse consequences to all the souls that were deceived and marked for the eternity. And this is important to be clarified, right? The so-called, between quotation marks, actual faith is the product of the mystery of iniquity, a theme which we consider must be approached so that it can be explained and people can understand it. Because the Church of God finds that there are many themes that are not explained, and if explained, nothing is said about them, or things are distorted. And the idea is that the truth be the truth. That is why we consider that we must have some variables very clear. For example, first, the deceit that has marked the lives of millions of people throughout the times. And this thing of the deceit is something extraordinary, complicated and difficult to understand, because the immense majority of people think that their lives are full of truth. But we repeat again, we have a serious problem. The Church of God recognizes it, because nowadays the teaching that survives is either Pauline or Pedrist, right? Or are Paulines the ones that teach, or are Pedrists the ones that teach? So then, ones with one thing and others with another. Obvious that the Paulists have a countless number of scandalous subdivisions with enough names to throw to the air, and the Pedrists are not left behind. There exists a community of beliefs inside them, terrible, because that is the problem, because we are dealing with a deceit, and while the doctrine of the Messiah is not taught, that is not the doctrine of Paul nor the doctrine of Peter, we will continue having serious problems like this, serious problems. So we understand that it is necessary for the Church of God to talk about these topics with the purpose that people give themselves a space for analysis, for doubts, for questioning, and can discover the background of things. Because the underlying problem is that we have a series of doctrines and a series of teachings, but we lack the doctrine and the teaching of the Messiah, to such a point that today we pass as true what others taught and not what the Messiah taught. That is why we are very clear that the souls were deceived. And that is also corroborated by the same book of Apocalypse or Revelation that clearly stipulates that Satan deceives the whole world. So imagine that this issue of the deceit is a very complicated thing, totally complicated, but is fundamental to cover it. We remember to you that if you have a question, a concern, or some doubt, you can write to the email the last church 7 in number, okay, gmail.com, and there you can make us your commentaries, your questions, your doubts, your concerns, and we will kindly answer them if that is your decision. Also, you can visit the webpage churchofgod.tk, and you can check in our webpage the resources that there exist.